everyone, it's Jo Carter here. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be giving you recommendations from my favourite genre. My favourite genre is political historical fiction, and the subgenre or the setting that I like the most is a medieval type world that looks like medieval England. I feel like this is a bit of a shock to me because I've always had a TBR for the past 5 or more years. I have had a TBR that has been massive, and that I bought all the books when I was a younger teenager, and so quite a lot of them was what I was interested then. But now as an adult, a few kind of struck out to me and were begging me to buy them, so I did, even though throughout a lot of these years as I've been an adult, I have wanted to not buy books to get my TBR down to 0. But what I want to talk about is the books that I really enjoy reading, and that made me come to the conclusion that my favourite genre of fiction is political historical fiction. Political historical is still a subgenre of historical, but I feel like I need to make the distinction because it can't just be any historical book. I particularly like ones that feature power play, and it doesn't just have to be kings and queens. I haven't actually found too many kings and queens books that I've loved. Not that I've read a lot in this genre, as I said, that I've wanted to, but a lot of the books that I've enjoyed have actually come from lower things like lordlings, town councils, merchant guilds or religious institutions, but they still have involved some kind of power play, and I really enjoy that. I like the themes of justice in that sort of situation because generally you are the good guys fighting against the bad, and generally by the end of the book the bad guys have been smashed to pieces. I really enjoy the medieval type setting. I like the castles and the horses and the knights and the battles. I enjoy the world without technology in it. There are also a few things that give some bonus points that really make me enjoy it. If there's a romantic interest in it, if there's some fantasy, if it revolves around some sort of medical plot, so whether it's the young woman who is becoming better at medicine than the men and she's got to fight for the right to be able to use her medicine or fight for their acceptance. Also, a really main point as well is that it has to be about how that plot affects the characters, not how the characters affect the plot, if that makes sense. To get me to really feel for it, I've got to know how the characters are dealing with these situations and how they strive for it. And then the political power play stuff is a good backdrop, but it has to be more about how this affects the characters for me to care. I'm going to go through some books that all sort of fit this bill and tell you guys why I like them and what they're about. I'm going to start off with a teen series, and that is the Stravaganza series by Mary Hoffman. The first one, The City of Masks. The second one, City of Stars, and the third one, City of Flowers. I have read more, there are more in the series, but I'm not finished yet. The premise of these is that each book features a different character, and when that particular character in modern day, present day times, they go to sleep with an object, and that object then transports them into an alternative Italy in the past. This one has political intrigue because there's this ruling family that has to be overthrown because they're bad. There's also romance in it, not quite as obvious to begin with, being like a teen book and being a largely fantasy and action teen book, but that's also fantastic. This series is timeless. It's something that's not really cringy, that doesn't age at all. It's a really good series to read. I'm looking forward to rereading it next year sometimes, and just the way that they involve the history and the culture, like it is an alternative world Italy, so it's not 100%, but you can definitely tell, like this book here, you can see the canals, it's based on that Italian city. The next books are based on other ones. I can't quite remember what they are at the moment, but the way that they integrate all the history and what it would have been like to live in that time period is fantastic, and I highly recommend them. Next series I'm going to talk about actually is in medieval England, and that is Ken Follett's Kingsbridge series. Now, I know I said that the subgenre is medieval that I enjoy the most. And that is true because like knights and horses and all that kind of thing. But I do enjoy ones that aren't specifically medieval England inspired, but in the past, anything from that time period sort of back is super interesting to me. The first one in the series is The Pillars of the Earth. The second is World Without End, which is almost or on par with my favourite books of all time. And the third one is A Column of Fire. These centre around a town called Kingsbridge, which I believe is a real town in England, and it centres around the building or the rebuilding of a cathedral. Most of them, except for the last one, don't actually feature kings and queens all that much. Of course, they are prevalent in it because kings and queens did have a lot of say over the lives of the people in England in that time. But the characters are just ordinary ones. They're not even lordings. I believe Aliana, one of the main characters in this one, she was supposed to be a lady, but then her dad ended up, like, his allegiance was to the wrong king, so they ended up being that. But I love them because these characters are just going about their day, trying to survive in this brutal world, and these horrible people are there abusing their power and getting in the way of these good people, and it's just such a struggle between like right and wrong. There's a lot of religious debate, which I find really fascinating, but there's also good religious people. Like, it's not just Bible bashing, there is also good people in the religion, and I love this series. World Without End made me absolutely bawl like a baby because of what happened. And again, it has romance. So probably for this one, it's a medieval setting. It's got political with the power plays. There is romance. There is medical themes. Like, it deals with the Black Death. Like, this book and it focuses on the characters amongst the backdrop of all these things. This book is bloody fantastic. But I will say, what made me realize the fact that sometimes I don't enjoy this kind of book as much is A Column of Fire, because it had themes of like Protestantism versus Catholicism and women empowerment, but I just wasn't gripped by it because it focused on England as a whole and the struggles as a whole. It didn't actually focus on the actual characters and what it meant to them, and that's where I think this one fell over a bit. It was kind of like, instead of being zoomed in right up close to the characters and knowing all their thoughts and their feelings, even though it was still in third person, we knew what they were thinking. It was like a zoomed out and we were looking at the whole country, and quite often many countries, instead of being focused on particular characters. So the next series I want to talk about has a controversial end, and I'm sure quite a lot of people know this one, but it is the Tearling series by Erika Johansen. I was a bit, do I include this or not? Because the last book is controversial and I agree with it, but I loved this first volume. I loved it. It was fantastic. So it has a touch of fantasy. This book is about a 19-year-old girl who has always known that she is going to grow up to be the queen, but because of all the political struggle going on in her country and with a neighbouring country, she was actually taken away as a young girl and grew up in a secret location as a foster child, being raised in learning about lordships and how to rule and being a queen and how to best look after your people. And this, I loved it because it was the right kind of political fiction where she went in and she had the most corrupt kingdom ever, and she went in and fixed some things and put on all these things in place to get things better and to get them going, and to just be like, the regent that was looking after her kingdom was an absolute dick, and so she was able to go in there and just, I love her. She did so well. I love her so much. I loved this book. Unfortunately, then the next one in the series wasn't as good, but it was still good, and then this one was good, but the ending was very controversial. So I guess proceed with caution with these. They were still fantastic, and I still think that this first book was worth it. But just know that, yeah, just prefer yourself, I guess. I love the atmosphere that we were in. We were in a castle, we were in medieval type days. It was just fantastic, and I loved Queen Kelsey triumphing over her bad people, and just, I guess, being brave enough to stand up and say, no, this is not okay, even though you felt like you had no choice, which is the excuse that her regent got. I don't care, I'm making a choice. Like, I love her. And there wasn't much of a romance. There's a tiny hint of a romance, but there wasn't much, and that made me kind of realize that I always thought that romance was what I needed in every book to have me hooked, but this one taught me not. And the last series I want to talk about is actually a duology, and that is Minette Walters' Black Death duology. So the first one is The Last Hours, and the second and last one is The Turn of Midnight. I loved both of these books. The Last Hours the most. I was drawn to this one. I was drawn to The Queen of the Tearling as well, but this book, this chunk of a thing, was drawing me in. It ticks a lot of boxes. This book is in medieval times. It's actually about the Black Death as it affects England and how that ends up freeing the serfs from being slaves and being kept shackled to their masters. This Ken Follett book has the Black Death in it too, so I really enjoy that time period because it's medical as well. And like the lady in this one, she is a woman and she takes over, and there again is the political part of it. And it was fascinating how they dealt with the Black Death and what measures they put in place. I didn't feel like I knew the main character in this as well as personally as I have with other ones, but I still friggin' cared what happened. So Minette Walters is great. This one I didn't enjoy as much as the first, but I think it was more that it didn't end, the conflict in this book didn't get resolved how I thought it was, and I think that kind of let me down, but when you think about it, it does make sense. However, I highly recommend. The ending is still great, so much better than, Erika Johansen's ending, even though it's not about the same thing, but I'm just saying it's still fantastic to be reading this book. Definitely it is a medical, it's not a medical book, but because it does the Black Death, it's not just a small part of the story, it is the story. So it's quite different to say something like The Queen of the Tearling, where this is more about how Kelsey, the Queen Kelsey, actually fixes corrupt things in her kingdom. It doesn't have the medical sickness health undertone that this one does, but it's a political thing. They're all the books that I'm wanting to talk about today. They are some of my absolute favorites and have what made me realize that it's not just fantasy and romance that gets my heart pumping. If you have any recommendations for that, please let me know in the comments down below. I hope I've inspired you. Let me know if any of these interested you. I'll talk to you guys again later. I post videos every Wednesday and weekend. I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!